In the news tonight, preliminary peace talks begin between the Syrian government and Kurdish fighters to prevent an escalation in the fighting, and Turkey says it will take a more active role in Syria in coming months. Thousands of Yemenis take to the streets of Sana'a in a show of support for the Houthi-led bloc that retains control of the capital and several major towns and cities across the country. And the London Tube, the world's oldest underground network, takes a big step forward, with the tube starting all-night services after years of obstruction and delay. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Head of the International Advisory Group, IAG, on Jordan's nuclear program, Maruf al-Bakhit, said the kingdom is pressing ahead with its nuclear energy program, taking a transparent approach and in line with international standards. Bakhit spoke at a press conference where he reviewed the IAG's first report on the status of the country's first nuclear reactor. Under the plan, 2 reactors would start operation by the year 2024 to generate 2,000 megawatts of electricity. Chairman of the Jordan Atomic Energy Agency, Khal said that Jordan will not sign the nuclear reactor project contract before financing agreement is completed, noting that 80 to 85% of the fund has been secured and that there are positive indicators to secure the remaining funds. Chaired by former Prime Minister al-Bakhit, the IAG was formed in November 2015 to provide consultations on Jordan's nuclear strategy, including funding of the plant and nuclear waste. Last year, Jordan signed an agreement with Russia worth $10 billion that sets the legal groundwork for building the nuclear power plant. The Independent Election Commission, IEC, said it scrutinized 230 lists that had registered to run for the September 20 parliamentary election and will call in the lists found with similar names or code. IEC spokesman Jihad al-Momani said the commission early today ended the revision of the names and codes and tallying the identical lists and identifying those that had applied first, and will summon the list candidates whose names or codes were duplicated with others. Momani said the IEC will formally notify the lists found in breach of executive instructions regarding a list nomination for a constituency. The instructions reaffirm authentication of the names and codes and to make sure there is no duplication or contradiction among them, and the right to a code or name will be given to the list that first submitted its application to the Commission, Momani added. Following approval of the lists, candidates will be requested to open joint bank accounts where campaign money would be deposited. Disclosure agreements will be signed with the listed candidates for transparency of funding sources and campaign expenditure. The IEC has also requested that each list appoints an external certified auditor who would report to the IEC on all financial matters related to the campaigns, for which a ceiling has been set to ensure equal opportunity and fairness among all. Pumping from the DC aquifer is back on as water supplies to the capital Amman and the city of Zarqa resumed this morning after a temporary halt that began yesterday evening, according to an announcement by the Jordan Water Company, Miyahuna. The company said its technical teams have managed to restore operation of the southern DC water conveyance project 8 hours earlier than expected. It said pumping is now back according to the water distribution schedule. Water from the southern underground reservoir is piped to Amman and other cities to meet increased water demand, particularly during the summer season. Jordanians continued to celebrate the victory of Taekwondo player Ahmed Abu Ghosh, who won gold at Rio yesterday, the first Olympic medal for Jordan. A big official and popular welcome ceremony awaits him on Tuesday night as he arrives back from Brazil. Abu Ghosh gave Jordan its first Olympic medal with a run to the gold, winning in the men's 68-kilogram division, defeating Russia's Alexei Densienko by a score of 10-6. In a nail-biting final, Abu Ghosh landed several jumping headshots that elicited gasps from the audience. The 20-year-old's success was closely watched at home, as much of Jordan stayed up till the early morning hours to watch his historic run at the Olympics. Family members members and friends gathered in Abu Ghosh's training gym in Amman to watch the final match, erupting in cheers and applause. Soon after Abu Ghosh received his medal, he got a telephone call from His Majesty the King, the Crown Prince, and His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, President of the Olympic Committee, and other royal family members expressing pride and happiness over the victory. And while Abu Ghosh made the whole country and the Arab world proud, nothing would compare to his parents' feelings.
This achievement has made us very proud. He made us proud and made Jordan proud. It is enough that he raised the Jordanian flag there in Brazil.
This win is dedicated to the country. It has always been my dream. I told him, God willing, you will lift the Jordanian flag in Brazil. May God grant him strength and bless him. And may God bless everyone who supported Ahmed so that he could reach this stage.
And over to regional news and to Iraq, where scores of Daesh terrorists were killed near Mosul in airstrikes launched by the international coalition, according to an Iraqi official. In a statement to Jordan's state news agency Petra, Brigadier Mohammed al-Bajari from Nineveh Governorate's command said the airstrikes killed 30 terrorists, including 4 suicide bombers in Bartala, 50 kilometers south of Mosul. Fighting between the Syrian army and Kurdish forces intensified late yesterday and into the day today, creating the risk of yet another front opening in the multi-sided civil war. But Syrian media said the two sides held preliminary peace talks in an indication of not wishing to escalate further. Syrian army warplanes bombed Kurdish-held areas of Hasaka after the fighting broke out this week. The fighting in Hasaka, which is divided into zones of Kurdish and Syrian government control, marks the most violent confrontation between the Kurdish YPG militia and Damascus in the civil war. Observers fear the fighting there could complicate the battle against Daesh because of the Kurds' role in the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces fight against the terrorist group. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, many residents of Kurdish areas fled yesterday, and at least 41 people have been killed in the fighting. And in Aleppo, fighting continued near the mouth of a corridor that rebels opened this month into besieged areas they control. Director of the United Nations World Food Programme, Jacob Kern, said opposition-held areas have been inaccessible for weeks and food is running short. In Turkey, meanwhile, Prime Minister Binali Yildirim said his country will take a more active role in addressing the conflict in Syria in the next 6 months to prevent the country being divided along ethnic lines. Speaking to reporters in Istanbul, Yildirim said while Syrian President Bashar al-Assad could have a role in the interim leadership, he must play no part in its future. And despite the intensified military involvement of world powers in Syria, Yildirim said he was optimistic that Iran, Gulf Arab states, Russia and the United States could work jointly to find a solution, adding that discussions, however, must take place between the local actors in the war. For some Syrian children, it seems there's no escape from the inevitable. The bodies of 3 Syrian children were pulled from the Mediterranean waters during a rescue operation of a migrant's wooden boat that capsized off the coast of Libya. A total of 304 rescued migrants and the bodies of 5 people, including 3 children, were brought to port in Sicily's Trapani. The Migrant Offshore Aid Station humanitarian group said the small vessel was packed with 27 Syrians when it flipped over and sank.
27 people had been on board a boat, of which then it had capsized. And I was talking to one of the survivors, and he told me that they had been forced on the boat. They knew it wasn't safe. And it kept on taking in water, and at some point, 4 hours later, it capsized. Everybody was thrown into the water. He had a family, he was holding his 2 children, and his wife was trying to stay afloat. They managed to alert a fisherman who managed to get them to safety, and at that point the search began for everybody else. 21 survived, but unfortunately 6 went missing, and of which 5 bodies have now been found.
The Turkish parliament has approved a reconciliation agreement with Israel that was signed in June, bringing to an end a 6-year rift between the two countries. The appointment of ambassadors will follow. Here's more.
Turkey's parliament votes to approve a reconciliation agreement to normalise ties with Israel. Relations between the two countries crumbled 6 years ago when Israeli Marines stormed a Turkish ship to enforce a naval blockade of the Gaza Strip. 10 Turks on board were killed in the raid. Under the deal, Israel has agreed to pay $20 million to the bereaved and injured. Turkey, in turn, will drop any outstanding legal claims. The naval blockade of the Gaza Strip, however, will remain in place, despite Ankara pushing for it to be lifted. Israel says it is still needed to curb arms being smuggled by the Islamist group Hamas, which runs the territory. The accord was signed by the two countries in June. It is partly driven by the prospect of lucrative Mediterranean gas deals and partly by mutual fears of growing regional security risks. Ambassadors from both countries will now be appointed.
Tens of thousands of Yemenis took to the streets of Sana'a in a show of support for the Houthi-led bloc that retains control of the capital and several major towns and cities across the country. The demonstration was one of the biggest in Yemen since mass protests in 2011 forced President Ali Abdullah Saleh to step down. The rally took place as the Saudi-led coalition backing the exiled President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi stepped up airstrikes after peace talks failed to end the 16-month civil war. The war has killed more than 6,500 people, displaced more than 2.5 million, and caused a humanitarian crisis. U.S. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump delivered yet another call to African-American voters, vowing to restore law and order and increase job opportunities. His plea was a repeated version he had offered to African-American voters 24 hours earlier in North Carolina in an effort to raise his single-digit standing with one of America's largest minority groups. Trump attacked his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton, saying no group in America has been more harmed by Clinton's policies than African Americans. Though Trump reorganized his campaign staff this week in a bid to end weeks of upheaval and reset his unorthodox bid for the White House, Clinton leads him by 8 percentage points among likely voters. However, political analysts say it is hard to imagine a much worse pitch Trump could have made for the black vote.
African-American citizen in this country, you're living in poverty, your schools are no good, you have no jobs, 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell do you have to lose? And at the end of 4 years, I guarantee you that I will get over 95% of the African-American vote. I promise you. Because I will produce for the inner cities, and I will produce for the African Americans. And the Democrats will not produce, and all they've done is taken advantage of your vote. That's all they've done. And once the election's over, they go back to their palaces in Washington, and you know what? They do nothing for you. Just remember it. We end up with nothing.
London's rail, the world's oldest underground network, took a big step forward with the tube starting all-night services after years of obstruction and delay. The service had been intended to launch in September last year but was delayed due to strikes over pay. And now that the agreement has eventually been reached, trains will run between North and South London and from east to west before being rolled out on 3 further lines, including to Heathrow Airport. The scheme is set to boost the capital's economy by $100 million a year. The first underground railway service ran in central London in 1863, and now the tube stretches well into London's suburbs and beyond. The tube carries over 1.3 billion passengers a year. London Mayor Sadiq Khan was among those to board the first Victoria Line service in the early hours of this morning.
The tube is a very low crime environment, and we want it to stay that way, whether it's during the day or during the night. So we've been looking at how we can deploy more officers to be on the trains themselves, to be travelling on the routes. We've got more officers at the locations where the services will end and people come to the end of their journey.
So who do you think will be using this line?
Well, nurses, doctors, porters, security guards, people enjoying a good night out, people coming back from the theatre, coming back from restaurants, coming back from gigs, everybody.
And from the world's oldest underground rail network to the much-awaited longest and highest glass-bottomed bridge in the world that opened in a scenic national park in central China's Hunan province. Spanning two cliffs in the Zhangjiajia Grand Canyon, the bridge is 433 meters long and 6 meters wide, hovering over a 300-meter vertical drop. For the sake of safety, the glass-bottomed bridge only receives 8,000 visitors per day at most, who need to make appointments one day ahead during the trial operation. The bridge is paved with 99 panes of 3-layer transparent glass. The Spanish La Liga is back and Barcelona cruised to a 6-2 victory against Real Betis as they begin their league title defense. It took the league champions just 6 minutes to take the lead when Arda Turan opened the scoring. Suarez grabbed a hat-trick and Messi bagged 2 goals. Ruben Castro scored Real Betis' 2 goals. Barca won the league and the Kings Cup last season and got their 2016-2017 campaign off to a strong start by beating Sevilla last week 3-0 at the Nou Camp to clinch a 5-0 aggregate Spanish Super Cup win. Real Madrid face Real Sociedad tomorrow, but will be without Cristiano Ronaldo and Karim Benzema. Benzema is suffering with injuries to hip and back, and Ronaldo is recovering from a knee injury sustained in the Euro 2016 final. Real Madrid have made just one new addition to their squad so far, exercising their buyback clause to bring striker Alvaro Morata home from a 2-year spell at Juventus for a reported $33.5 million. If Real do not make any more signings between now and the close of the transfer window on the 31st, this will be the lowest figure the club has spent on transfers in a close season for 15 years. And finally, moderate conditions continue in most regions for the rest of tonight with northwesterly light to moderate winds. Tomorrow, high temperatures prevail during the day with a maximum of 36 degrees Celsius expected in Amman, while winds will be northwesterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba should continue to expect hot conditions with northerly moderate winds and slightly high seas. The weatherman warns of direct exposure to the sun during peak hours, especially in the Jordan Valley and the Aqaba. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Preliminary peace talks begin between the Syrian government and Kurdish fighters to prevent an escalation in the fighting. And Turkey says it will take a more active role in Syria in coming months. Thousands of Yemenis take to the streets of Sana'a in a show of support for the Houthi-led bloc that retains control of the capital and several major towns and cities across the country. And the London Tube, the world's oldest underground network, takes a big step forward with the tube starting all-night services after years of obstruction and delay. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.